Hey, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, based on wherever you are in the world today. Welcome to Supply Chain Now. Scott Luton and Greg White with you today for a great show. Greg, how are we doing?
We're doing great. I thought about whenever you say that, it could actually be tomorrow somewhere that we're talking to, straight up noon here, right? So,
Continuing the theme, Greg
do we
misses nothing.
say happy tomorrow or 'cause it's today
Oh,
there?
the
Uh,
we'll have to ponder that
yeah, let
question
us.
through the weekend. But folks, today once again, not only do we have Greg White back, the one and only Greg White back, who's had his hands full lately, we have an outstanding show teed up all
Yeah,
around the ever shifting, ever evolving, ever challenging world of freight. So, on this episode, we're going to be sharing key insights from one of the leading transportation industry resources. Y'all know it, it's the US Bank Freight Payment Index, but this time for Q3 2021. Greg, hard to believe we're already talking in review in the rearview mirror about Q3, huh?
it's true. I was just talking to somebody the other day, and they said it is almost November, right? I mean, it is really this year, unlike last year, which shall not be named.
Right.
This year has flown by, it feels like, doesn't it? I mean, does it to you
Oh,
as
no,
well?
undoubtedly,
Yeah,
undoubtedly. And of course, I can only remember just a few of the headaches we've all experienced here in 2021. So, but all of that told, all of that said, we have a slew of new best practices, right? New learnings, new takeaways that supply chains around the world are applying, but a lot of them come out of conversations like the one we're going to have here today. Is we're going to be gaining key takeaways from the freight payment index from two business leaders with extensive experience in the transportation markets. So,
yeah.
Greg, before we introduce our guests and before we say hello to a few folks, and Peter and Sushil, great to see you all here today. Tell us about you know this ongoing collaboration that we've had now with US Bank, because they're one of the leading financial institutions involved in powering global supply chain, especially transportation. So tell us about why US Bank.
Well, it turns out, Scott, when people ship things, the people who ship them for them want to get paid.
What?
Is that not what a brilliant concept that is?
Right.
But and of course there are hundreds, thousands, millions of shipments all over the world all the time, and U.S. Bank is one of the key resources for funding that, for making sure that those payments happen. $31.4 billion worth of transactions in the last year, and in last year, remember that year that shall not be named,
Right.
and it's hard to figure out how to say that. And of course, that gives them an incredible amount of insight into where things are going, how many shipments are being made, what the cost is, whether that cost is fluctuating up or down. And Bobby Holland, who almost everybody knows, and those of you who don't, you soon will. Bobby's brilliance, and what he and his crew do is they put together this index that shows us how things are trending, how they compare to the last quarter, how they compare to the last year, and that sort of thing. And that's it's a really important service, particularly now. And I got to say, I'm not gonna no spoiler alert here, but it's really a little bit jumbled this time around, and I think people will be interested to see how things and why trends mostly have shifted. So, it's gonna be interesting to go through this time.
I can't agree with you more. Really enjoyed the prep shows and all the prep work that goes into some of these things. The U.S. Bank team in particular, gosh, to put out something as comprehensive as the Freight Payment Index, they went into overdrive over these last few weeks. I want to say hello, Greg, to a few folks, and then we're going to
Sure.
welcome in our guests here today. So Peter Bolet, all night and all day, always with us. He's off in 15 minutes, he says, to get supplies to install the under cabinet lighting in the kitchen. How about that for a
Have
project?
we shown his kitchen since he finished it? And I hope those lights are LED, Peter. 'Cause, I mean, not just for the environmental factor, but back when you could only get halogens, halogens create a tremendous amount of heat underneath your cabinets. We had under cabinet lighting that was halogen. Just astounding the amount of heat that generates. Anyway,
Man, one minute I'm sitting next to Greg White, next minute I'm sitting next to Bob Villa. There's nothing that Greg does not offer expertise on. Hey, Peter Boley, great to have you here today, and really enjoyed your popping in yesterday as well. Sushil is with us via LinkedIn. Sushil, great to see you here today. Looking forward to your POV. And folks, we want to hear from you. We've got two experts, really three. I'm going to throw Bob Villa in there as well, that you're going to be hearing from throughout the hour, but we want to hear from you as well. So hello, Sushil. And then Jeff Leroy, a great friend of the show. Jeff leads one of the supply chain organizations down in Savannah, and you talk about a growing mecca for all things logistics and transportation. Savannah is a dynamic market, right?
Yeah, harder and harder to brag about not having the container and ship jam like the West Coast has, right? I think
that's right.
I'd love to hear if Jeff's got eyes on that and kind of where that stands.
That's right. Jeff, all the best to you and your family, and great to see you here today. We welcome your perspective. And yes, just to knock off the important things here, Peter says, yes, low voltage LEDs. All right. So Greg, are you ready to welcome in our two esteemed guests here today?
Yeah, particularly today, because one of them represents several of the world's favorite foods.
So yes, and we're going to we're going to establish that, because you're absolutely right. I want to welcome in Bobby Holland, Director Freight Data Solutions at U.S. Bank, and Patricia Gabriel, Vice President, U.S. Customer Service and with Mondelez International. Hey, Bobby, Patricia, how are we doing this afternoon?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful here in the home studio on this gorgeous Metro Atlanta afternoon, and we have got some wonderful, hardworking folks just on the other side of the wall. Y'all might can hear them. I don't know, but it's got to be a gorgeous day to be outside making stuff happen. But in the meantime, Greg, we're really excited, as y'all heard, to tee up this episode here today. Focus on the Q3 Freight Payment Index and continuing our work with the U.S. Bank team. And Patricia, gosh, as Greg alluded to, Mondelez is one of our favorite companies. And Greg, go ahead and let the cat out of the bag. Why is that?
Because Mondelez, among other things, makes Oreo cookies, the greatest food on the planet, and Toblerone and a ton of other products like that. So we've hit kind of the U.S. centric with Oreo, and Toblerone, of course, known worldwide. So, and I can't even list all the others. But how would we survive without you, Patricia?
Yeah, many more.
That is right. And we enjoyed our prep conversations with you both, Patricia in particular. I think we talked a little bit about chocolate and beer, one of our collective favorites. But for starters, before we dive into the Freight Payment Index, let's get to know you all a little bit better. Let's start with Bobby. Bobby, of course, you've been here 72 appearances with us. We've always enjoyed those. Refresh our listeners' memory of who Bobby Holland is.
Well, I've been with U.S. Bank for 5 years. I come from a long software engineering and software development background. So being a data-related, data science-oriented, not a data scientist, data science-oriented product manager, this is kind of in my wheelhouse. So
wonderful. And Greg, no one cuts through the tidal wave of data to offer real signals and things you got to pay attention to, like Bobby. Even if he says data science-oriented, I'm with you, Bobby. I can't own anything science related, but Greg, Bobby's one heck of a resource, huh?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you've ever seen this freight index, you've seen his handiwork, and of course the handiwork of the entire U.S. Bank team. But making sure that we distill this down. What I love about this thing is it's perfect for me to analyze, and I think a lot of people probably like Patricia to analyze, because you can get through it so quick. It's visually engaging. The explanations are complete but concise, and you don't feel like you're reading a novel every time you read this thing. And it's every single time, there's something surprising in this, and this time around is no different, for sure.
Well said, Greg. Speaking of Patricia, can y'all hear that? I
do hear it now.
Okay.
Now that you said
all right.
something.
just on the other side.
You just wanted to make sure you turned the gain up so we could hear it.
Evidently. Hey, Patricia, same question for you. Tell us a little about yourself here.
Yes, so my name is Patricia. I'm working at Mondelez International, as you said. Much more brands than the one you referred to, although the Oreo is obviously iconic and Toblerone as well. But we do also sort of Patch Kids, we do Ritz, we do Milka chocolate. I'm working there as really into the transportation, logistics, distribution, customer service. So obviously, my life over the last year and a half have been very exciting through the challenges that we are going through as a market and across actually. I've been in supply chain and very like for more than 20 years. We'll say 20-year plus, okay. And
You're
not
learning.
only not only into chocolate, but also into the beer industry, which has, as a good Belgian that I am, yes, I'm not French. I know I have the French accent, but actually in Belgium we speak French as well. So as a Belgian, having done part of my career in the beer industry and part in the chocolate, I think it's a good strategy. And yeah, I've been doing distribution, logistics, customer service for a long time now. Very excited to be there and discussing on the freight index.
I
Yeah,
love that.
we're glad to have you. You just throw waffles into that mix, and eventually, and you'll have the entire country covered, right? You'll have done everything.
Well, so Greg, talk about passion. Goodness gracious. Patricia and Bobby has got it in truckloads as measured every quarter here on Supply Chain Now. So Patricia, welcome. Big fans of the Mondelez team. All right. So Greg, and by the way, let's confirm. Jeff says yes, Savannah Port does have plenty of container congestion and backlog. You know, that was, as we all know, for a long time, that was the one of the main alternatives, right?
Wait,
Folks?
yeah, that's right. People were coming through the canal to Houston and Jacksonville and Charleston and Savannah. And I think they're all starting to stack up. But let's just pause for just a moment. I think Bobby's taking notes here. He's going to be looking into that for the next, right, freight payment index quarterly report.
That's right. He doesn't miss anything either.
Jeff, you might get a phone call in the name of research.
So Greg, with Bobby and Patricia here, where are we going next?
Yeah. So look, aside from what we talked about before we brought you both on, the $31.4 billion worth of transactions that U.S. Bank facilitates. Bobby, tell us a little bit about why you do this, how, kind of how you accumulate the data, and just give people, again, a baseline for how the index works.
Well, Greg, as you mentioned, the $31.4 billion in freight transactions, shippers and carriers, generates a lot of data, and we want to be able to provide value to our customers using that data. And so one of the ways that we've done this, and our first project and product from my product team, was the freight payment index. And we wanted to demonstrate, well, we wanted to first add our perspective to the marketplace. We're not saying that we are the end all and be all of indexes or indices. We basically wanted to provide another perspective to give our customers and the market at large another data point. And so that's basically what the freight index was, another data point to help in their decision making. And it provides our perspective. We wanted to add the regional perspective since that wasn't represented in the marketplace. And so that's what we brought to bear.
Well, you might not say you're the end all be all, but I will. $30 billion worth of transactions speaks to it. And as you said, you capture a lot of volume, and you added, of course, the regional breakdown is really important, and I think particularly interesting this time around. So, Patricia, maybe you can give us some insight how you at Mondelez use this index. We love to have professionals who are on the ground or in the marketplace, seeing what the data represents, and it's great to understand how you all use it.
We definitely use it a lot, obviously, because to what Bobby was saying, it provides us a very good market indicator, definitely, and understand also how we are performing and how our rates are in line with the market. The regional breakdown is also very insightful for us, as obviously we are moving product across the United States. So we definitely use and leverage really to understand some of the indicators that are helping us. The data set is always, and the visualization is very, very insightful. We are also using obviously other data and analytics. I think especially in the current circumstances, we need to understand more the leading indicator, because at the end of the day, it's also for us understanding the past to also predict and forecast how the next quarter is going to be as well, right? Because this is part as well of the big questions for us, how to stay agile.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common. I mean, when we started doing this, Bobby and Scott, I know you remember, we had the VP of logistics at Home Depot, and very similar, right? It gives you both an indication of what just happened, which I think is a feeling a lot of people have right now. But also it does give you some indication as to trend and the regional part of it, especially for someone who ships nationally and, of course, internationally, as you do. I got to imagine that is having an impact on your business regionally, and it has to be impacting margins differently in different areas of the country. So knowing that breakdown is really important.
Well said. Well said. And Patricia, I bet you've got some big time to-dos on that board just over your left shoulder, right?
That's the one of my daughter.
See your daughters.
We have an open space policy here, an open office policy.
Open office, great. So does one of those say study for the SAT? Because we know you have that coming up also, right?
This one is only in 7th grade. Look at her to-do list.
Wow, man. We'll have to see if we can't get her into the supply chain industry. She's clearly a planner and a doer. Well, kidding aside, Patricia, I appreciate that. And by the way, I want to give a shout out to Larry Klein down in Albany, Georgia, I believe. Larry, hope this finds you well, and great to see you here today. I want to hear, whether you're Jeff, Peter, Sushil, you name it, all the other listeners, want to hear your take on freight markets, global supply chain, name it, some of what we're talking about here today. All right, so Bobby, I want to circle back to you. I want to ask you, starting, with the Q3 freight payment index, what is this one telling us? Let's start from that national point of view. Give us that overview.
Well, nationally, we saw growth, but it was a slow growth, slightly slower pace than the third quarter. We've found or believe this is largely due to things like, COVID-19 impacts, particularly from the Delta variant. We've talked and alluded to supply chain constraints, some of which include, auto plant slowdowns and shutdowns due to things like, the microchip shortage and other components, other input components to the manufacturing process. And then we also had, storms. So all of these things we called them out in the index as headwinds. But then on the other side, we had drivers such as, the port traffic that we've talked about. We still had solid home construction activity. Consumer spending still been pretty robust. Traffic has still been moving across, Mexico and Canadian borders. And then we also, in some non-automotive sectors, had improved factory output. So basically it just results in an overall growth, but again, not as robust or as fast paced as it was in second quarter.
Yep. Outstanding. And we're sharing some of the visuals there. Of course, to sign up for this report for free, check out freight.usbank.com and you'll get your own copy each quarter. Before we go region by region, Bobby and with Bobby, Greg and Patricia, any initial takeaways? Greg, I'll start with you. Any initial takeaways, just kind of speaking to that overall bigger picture?
Yeah, I mean, I think the large, when you think about it from the large picture standpoint, it's hard not to be surprised that the impact of constraint largely stems. I think this speaks to this largely. It largely speaks to the constraint of the workforce, because the reason that semiconductors are not available and various and other things is because people aren't back at work yet in the States. Many are not, right? So I guess I was really, really surprised at the impact that continues to have, and you start to see, and people will see it as we go through the rest of this report. You start to see the circularity and kind of network effect of that on the supply chain. One thing affects the next and the next and the next, and it comes back to, all the way around. So that was probably the biggest takeaway I saw at a macro level.
Yep, quite a cycle. And Patricia, anything to add on the front end before we go down region by region?
No, we have seen definitely a third quarter with a very strong demand across the markets, and obviously the capacity, and we're going to discuss this in the regional insights, but the capacity didn't really improve. We still have the driver shortage, the new trucks not coming in, and so on. So we have seen obviously the impact for us as an industry, obviously, and the pricing and how difficult it gets to only secure capacity. Not even talking about price, is how do we get trucks and access to trucks. So really, it really gets into a fight for capacity right now, even beyond the pricing.
Wonderful. I appreciate that, Greg and Patricia. And so, Bobby, with that said, let's go down region by region and give kind of some of your key takeaways, and then we'll get Greg and Patricia to offer up some color commentary. Let's start with the Northeast division, and really quick to our listeners. So the freight payment index is broken up when they dive a little deeper to 5 regions: Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, Southwest, and West. And we're going to work these from East Coast to West and get a little more lower altitude, a little more specificity in what we're seeing. So, Bobby, let's start with the Northeast.
Okay, so what we saw in the Northeast, it had its largest quarter-to-quarter gain in more than 2 years, and of course that covers the COVID period, the heavy COVID-19 period, where the Northeast got really hammered in that regard with the shutdowns. But it was up 5.1% from Q2. Has one of the most population dense areas, and so with that, retail sales have a big impact on shipments. And then we also, on the other side of that coin, we see that housing starts slowed. So a lot of the housing prices are going crazy, it appears. I can personally attest to, but but it's not new stuff. It's selling old inventory. So housing starts were basically flat. So again, moderate growth in the shipment side, and then the spend index was up about 3.1%. And again, as we've been talking about, and you'll kind of hear that, as you pointed out earlier, Greg, a recurring theme of higher diesel prices and tight industry capacity. One of the things, that we've started to see more this quarter than previous quarters is the impact of, not only the truck driving shortage, but actually the truck shortage.
Right.
There were some allusions to it back, I think, even as early as like the Q4 of last year, start to inkling about it, a little heavier in Q1. But now, to your point earlier, it's making a more severe impact across the board, because all the clever and creative things that both shippers and carriers and all associates had to do to accommodate these things, that's like basically one other item that's kind of being slowly taken off the table, so or at least impacted heavily.
The hits keep on coming for sure there in the Northeast. Any commentary there, Greg or Patricia?
Yeah, I think first agree with what Bobby said. I think we, as shippers, we still see limited capacity in the Northeast, into New England and so on. There's a lack of return freight, obviously, so it's hard to get carriers moving some of the loads because, to be honest, they cannot return, and then they will prefer to move the loads on another lane. So definitely see that impact. And the shortage, we touched base a little bit on the shortage of drivers, but overall the shortage on labor, also in the warehousing and in the trucking industries is also very prominent in the Northeast. You see this impact into some of the DCs and warehouses in that region.
And Greg, I'm gonna give you the last word on the mighty Northeast.
Yeah, well, I think I saw Bobby probably acknowledge this too when Patricia said it. The lack of backhaul freight is a significant issue in the Northeast all the time, and we've talked about that in previous reports as well. But now I would imagine with the with the rates being where they are, that's stunting that demand even further, which is making it harder to find carriers to go into these more, I don't know if I'd say remote, but whatever, less populated areas, because they're less likely to find a return haul out of there.
Well said. And that is certainly a recurring theme. I want to bring in a comment here from Kelly Barner. So some of y'all may know Kelly Barner leads our Dial P for procurement and also buyers meeting point. Kelly says, I know one of the ideas that has been floated is bringing the National Guard in to help drive trucks. That is going to be a challenge here in the Northeast where she lives. We have some of the strictest vaccine mandates in the nation. So the National Guard has already been called up to drive school buses, work in hospitals, prisons, state police, you name it. So that is great perspective there, Kelly. Thanks so much for sharing.
And I can confirm that we have a shortage of bus drivers, school bus driver here as well.
That's
now,
that pink
finally,
note
our
on the
families
board.
understand the challenges we have in terms of trucking capacity and shortage of drivers.
You know, we can't let one of these shows, thank you for sharing that, Patricia. We can't let one of these shows take place without calling out the need to hug on those truck drivers. They have such a tough job, and lots of burnout there, lots of, as we've learned firsthand, mistreatment, and they're the backbone of the industry. So thank you for sharing that, Patricia. Okay, so from the Northeast, let's keep driving here to the Southeast. Bobby, what are we seeing in the Southeast?
Okay, the Southeast region was one of the ones that, from a shipments perspective, that contracted, slowed about 2.9% from the previous quarter. This is the Midwest is the other contracting region with shipments. But we know that the Southeast was impacted by severe weather, as well as, fluctuations due to COVID-19.
Right.
But they're also impacted by auto production, which declined as well for all the reasons that we've previously discussed. But on the other hand, housing starts are still elevated there. And we've talked about that in previous versions of the index, where the cycle is catastrophe, insurance, and then rebuilding, truck freight increases. So, we'll be looking to see if that cycle repeats itself here. But again, shipments down and spend up.
Yep. And really quick, before we get Greg and Patricia to respond, Kelly says, having a National Guard drive trucks is a fabulous idea, supply chain now, and much less scary than driving a school bus. All right. True. Good stuff there, Kelly.
We can protect the load as well as haul the load.
Right. So continuing on Southeast, and let's go to Patricia first. Anything else stick out to you, Patricia?
No, I think the storm and the weather has definitely impacted the third quarter for the Southeast. Not as bad as some other years, to be very honest. I think it was not as bad as we anticipated, but for the rest, yes. And it's also like the Northeast. There's also a lack of return freight into the Southeast, obviously putting a lot of pressure on the capacity.
Yeah, thank you for that, Patricia. Greg?
I'm only speculating, but I think one of the things that the particular case of the Southeast and the Midwest, which we'll talk about in a second, makes me believe is that the cost and availability is suppressing demand, because while shipments are down, I know there are plenty of shipments that are, it's probably latent demand out there, things that can't be shipped because there aren't enough drivers. And so the attempt or the transaction of a shipment payment never actually occurs, right? So that was a bit of an epiphany for me, is that at this point, the demand, the limitations of capacity are actually suppressing demand. Bobby, does that kind of jive with what you've seen in the data?
It's possible. Like I said, the usual things that our customers have to do to manage around these obstacles seem to compound. Mm-hmm. And you can only go so far with shifting things around. And we were even reading articles and looking at and seeing things about cannibalizing truck fleets. so after a point, there's only so much you can do, and then you just have to work with what you have. You can't get more clever. And so that's basically an indication of what you just stated, that once you reach that limit, you've just got to let it ride out with what you have.
Well said. All right. So that was the Southeast. And Bobby, from there, we're going to start to move our way westward, and we're going to talk about the Midwest. So what are we seeing there in the Midwest?
Midwest, as I stated, was the other region that was down from a shipments volume perspective. It was down basically less than 1%, 0.7%. The spend, however, grew 3% from the second quarter. So again, less things happening, and auto production is big in the Midwest, and it was off more than 30% from a year earlier. Again, because critical aspects of the supply chain for auto manufacturing were missing. The microchips are the ones that, make the news, that everybody's familiar with. Because a lot of not only is it the auto manufacturing, but a lot of the freight that comes out of the Midwest is auto related. There's an impact to that as well. But the spend wise, the fuel prices are still going up. One of the things we quoted in the index was that diesel rose about 3%, almost 4% in the third quarter. And basically it's up almost 44% from last year. So, you can do the math and just see that's why, spend was so many orders of magnitude over what the shipment volume increase or the shipment volumes were.
Right. All right. So coming to you first, Greg, when we talk about the Midwest, some of what Bobby has shared versus maybe other things you saw in the analysis. Anything stick out?
Well, what started to stick out as I went through this analysis myself was that this is a familiar tune. There aren't enough trucks. There aren't enough people driving the trucks. Right. And fuel prices are very, very high. 40%. They were up 40% in the Southeast. So basically, fuel prices are up 30 to 44% across the nation. Right. So just to give you an idea, anything that cost you $2 before, right now costs you $2.67, and diesel fuel is much higher than that. So you can,
I think it's about $3.70 now.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Roughly.
So that's, I saw a bargain yesterday, Bobby, $3.45.
As you were driving the truck through Atlanta, Greg, right?
That's right. Well, I was just checking out all the fuel prices to see how high they were, and then I went to Costco. But I think this was the point about the third of regions that I started to analyze, that I went, it's the same story nationwide. You're going to hear it, but there are certain other impacts as well. And I think one of the things we need to recognize is that trucks, just like cars, they expire, right? They have extended their useful life. Bobby said you can only get so, I want to say cheeky, but you can only get so clever with trying to keep these things on the road. And then eventually you've got to get it off the road, and there aren't enough trucks there to replace it. So even if we do have the drivers, we don't have the trucks, and we don't have the trucks because we don't have the workers in the factories, and we don't have the workers in the factories, right? Because people aren't going back to work. So that will, I believe, start to abate, because now that the federal pandemic unemployment insurance is going away, people have rolled to their respective state unemployment insurance, and now with the actual requirement of having to actually look for a job to keep getting it. So people will have to start going back to work, but it is, I have to say, much slower than I expected at any job, not just driving, right? But at any job.
It's probably going to slow ramp back up to repair the damage to the supply chains. It's not just going to, pop back as soon as people start going back to work.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The challenges certainly will keep coming. Patricia, your thoughts when it comes to the Midwest?
Yeah, I think what we have seen that we didn't talk yet about is obviously it's the congestion that we see on the intermodal around Chicago, right? And obviously the congestion is well known. It's there for quite some time, but it definitely got worse even in the third quarter. And then everybody's converting obviously to trucks, and this put even more pressure, I would say. So that's definitely something that was also experienced from our side and from the market.
That's a great call out, Patricia. I read
Mhm.
somewhere that there was in one of the big rail yards a 25-mile backup
Yeah.
for rail cars to get into. Man, holy cow! By the way, Larry Klein says more loads, smaller trucks, simple solutions. Maybe we'll see, Larry. Hey, well, along those lines, Greg, one company. Speaking of more loads, smaller trucks, or smaller loads, Roadie, of course. I cannot remember who acquired them not too long ago, but
UPS.
UPS did. That's right. So, freeing up the trunk of a sedan to make a delivery. Fascinating times we live in for sure.
Hard to fit a pallet of Oreos in a sedan, however.
That's true. But
Believe
you know
me,
what?
I've tried.
You beat me to it, Greg. You beat me to it. Hey, we do love our Oreos around here. Okay. So that is the Midwest. And by the way, I'm going to share Joshua's comment here. He says, can't wait until we get to the West Coast where diesel prices are out of control and the ports are clogged with empty containers. Joshua, excellent points, and looking forward to your POV as well. All right. So from the Midwest, Bobby, let's move from the Midwest to the Southwest. So tell us what you see there.
Southwest shipments rose about 2%, 1.9% over Q2, about 4.3% from a year earlier. And what we see in the Southwest is still high retail sales levels. Housing starts growing. Consumer consumption is also growing, even though there's a surge of COVID-19 Delta variant in some places in the Southwest. Interesting thing was seeing crude oil rig counts jumping almost 10% from the second to the third quarter, which is helping bolster shipments. And then same with the Mexico, so cross-border shipments from Mexico rising. And since the Southwest has one of the largest number of ports of land ports across their border, again, it's helping to buoy up their shipment traffic.
Yeah.
Gosh. So Greg, talking about the Southwest, what else comes to mind based on what you heard Bobby say and what the data is telling you, as well as our fingers on the pulse across supply chain?
Well, I think I believe it was last quarter also, energy shipments are largely buoying this segment of the country, right? Because oil prices are higher, people are apparently putting in more wells. Though I have to say, Bobby, that was a surprise to me.
Yep.
Almost 10% increase. But that's what's moving. At the same time, all of that goodness is just barely getting growth into the system quarter over quarter and year over year, and yet prices are still rising dramatically.
Yeah, the spend index was up almost 6%, which in these modest rises is a pretty good sized one, especially for the Southwest.
Yeah. Well, in 27, almost 27% year over year as well. So so we're continuing to see that inflation. There it is. That inflation in shipment cost and spend grow. Not as much, I think, overall, Bobby, not as much as Q2, but still pretty significant in terms of rate or spend increase.
Great.
So coming to you next, Patricia, when you look at the Southwest, what we're seeing there, what comes to mind?
Yeah, the capacity is very tight on the cross-border, as Bobby mentioned, right? There's a clear imbalance between the export and import. So very hard to find trucks. And then for the international shipments, we can't go intermodal so much because it gets congested in the Midwest. You go back to truckloads that you can still not find out of Laredo and the Texas border, right? So this is about trying to find the capacity, moving from one problem to another problem. And when we're going to get most probably on the west, we're going to discuss on the port congestion. So it feels like a little bit of a domino effect, and you're trying to fix somewhere, and then it appears somewhere else, right? So,
Peter to pay Paul comes to mind in many ways there. I want to bring up, so Joshua knows where we're going. We're about to move to the West Coast where we're seeing some big things. He says, I heard that the Port of Oakland has excess capacity. How feasible would it be to redirect shipments up north? I'll tell you, as we've seen, Greg, here on the East Coast, folks have moved from Savannah to Charleston, which is just, I don't know how many nautical miles that is, but Charleston has been benefiting from some of the congestion in the Savannah port. So Joshua knows where we're going. So on that note, then, Bobby, let's talk about the Western region. So what are we seeing there?
The West had one of the largest gains, especially on the shipment side. They were up 13.8% from the second quarter. And we've been talking about it in bits and pieces about the significant activity in the West, which is reflected in high port volumes and lots of trucking activity, attempting to move that from the port into the state and into the country. However, from a shipment perspective, there was a slowdown in housing starts, up over last year, but still fell from the previous quarter. On the spend side, it was up almost 16% from second quarter, which was a second straight gain, about 44% over this time period last year. Again, strong freight rates for all the reasons that we've talked about. One of the big ones is, and part of the port congestion issue is, we talked about it a little bit in the last index call, which is the retailers trying to replenish their stores,
right,
as well as to prepare for the holiday season in this quarter. And so, again, they're trying to get as much in as they possibly can. And then on top of that, you have high fuel prices. Diesel was up 5.6% over Q2 and 37% over a year earlier. So it's all same theme, putting pressure on all the activity that is attempting to rectify previous problems.
Mm. Well, hey, really quick, as we talk, of course, we've been in feels like a year-round peak. Amanda was telling me, who's Amanda, Jada, Clay, and Allie, appreciate y'all's production work here today, that Target has rolled out an incentive that encouraging folks to buy now. Mm-hmm. And if there's a discount later, as we get into the holidays and first of the year, they'll just offer up that refund based on where that discount was. I think it's interesting to see how that will play out, Greg. And Patricia and Bobby, but let's talk about the West for a second. So based on what Bobby shared there, Greg, what else sticks out in the wild, wild West?
So I think the increase in shipments shows that they are actually getting goods through the ports finally, even though we talk a lot about port congestion and it's always about Long Beach and LA. They must be getting goods through to have that level of increase in terms of shipments. The pricing is confiscatory, of course, but I mean, this is the market that we live in. And by the way, to answer Joshua's earlier question, if the capacity is there, somebody ought to test it. Unless there is something fatally flawed about the Port of Oakland, then yes, it is absolutely feasible because, Joshua, a lot of those shipments are actually going through the canal to Houston or Jacksonville or Savannah or Charleston, as Scott was talking about. So I would think Oakland would be much more feasible for at least a certain number of shipments than doing all of that.
Well said. Confiscatory. That's a new one for me, Greg. Gosh, I'm going to have to look up I'm going to have to bring my dictionary to these conversations. All right, Patricia. So no shortage of things going on in the West. What sticks out to you?
Yeah, not much more. By the way, I'm not even trying to say that word. It's impossible for me.
But I bet it sounds great with a Belgian accent.
Yeah.
Probably sounds much more intelligent.
I think the point of that we are all making, indeed, the retailer brought a lot of the seasonal products as ahead of time as they could. I think for us, the big unknown is how much the consumer will also react to the supply chain disruption that we see buying ahead of the holiday season, the Christmas gifts, and Thanksgiving, and so on. So this is definitely also a potential shift into some of the behavior that we see, because these supply chain disruptions are really everywhere now in the news. And I think there's a much better understanding and awareness of the consumer, which can be also very tricky, by the way, but because we need to make sure the product is already there, right? So
Right.
this is really for us the preparation of the season.
Excellent point, Patricia. Excellent point. But gosh, no shortage of things. We need, feels like we need a couple extra hours, as always, Bobby and Greg and Patricia. All right. So, Greg, where are we going next with this esteemed panel?
Well, I think it's time to ask the big question, the one where Bobby has to recuse himself. Right? But before we do that, I'd like to, Bobby, whatever you can share with this that is either analytic, historically, or indicative maybe of the future, or whatever you can share. I'd love to hear kind of what is your big takeaway here?
The big takeaway, I think, is just that the problems that are being experienced, I think that they will be handled, but I don't think the solutions are going to be, or the impacts of the solutions are going to be immediate. I think that ultimately we're going to crest this hill, but it's going to take it's going to be a long cresting. It's not going to be like things are going to bounce back or snap back in Q4 or even by Q1. Because again, the fact that the supply chain is so severely impacted, it can't snap back, in 1 or 2 quarters. So 2022 should still continue to be an interesting year with a lot of contradictions.
Excellent point. And, Greg, speaking of not being able to snap back, there's some systemic things that must be addressed in order to mitigate future situations like this. We talked, the ports, of course, has been a main theme here. And you look at from Gene Soroka to many others that know ports best. We got some catching up to do in terms of how data and visibility is shared multi-party. Greg, you and I have talked about kind of the fiefdoms that are created, and it's that coopetition between the ports, right, that takes place. How can we systematize that in a much more holistically efficient manner? The truck driver situation that we talk about every time we have this show, we talked about here. I mean, that's a system. How can we change the role there? How can we change how that profession is also treated within industry? No shortage of really systemic issues that aren't going to be resolved overnight. But Greg, what are your key takeaways? You and Patricia's. What else are you thinking here before we move into wrap up?
Well, to the point that Bobby made earlier, even when we do get people back to work, right? Even when the government stops paying people to stay away from work, and largely has, to their credit, finally, to this, at this point, it is going to take a while, because people have not just stayed away and collected money from the government. They've stayed away and rethought their priorities. Right. And it was hard enough to get drivers before COVID. Right. The incoming generations of workers are not inclined to be long haul truck drivers. What we've seen is to some extent, I've seen some reports of actually baby boomers coming out of retirement to become drivers because they're willing to do that job or whatever. But that's not going to be enough. So to the point that I think everyone has made, this will not be a rapid recovery. We will probably see ebbs and flows like this. We'll see differing regional effects. I mean, winter is about to come to the Northeast, where Bobby lives, and to the upper Midwest, and that will start to impact things. And with so many people in supply chain already on their heels with uncommon supply chain disruptions like government intervention, then when the natural disruptions come, like weather, they're less equipped. As Bobby said, they're doing all these clever things to fix the problems they have today. They have to adapt those clever things when the natural occurrences of storms and weather and and seasonality of peak occur. So I think that, the big takeaway is we're a long way from seeing any kind of stability. I would argue even indicative trends or changes in the data here, and probably and certainly on the ground. But I'm not on the ground, so I'd love to hear what Patricia thinks.
I
So,
think, Greg, you are spot on the drivers. I think this is really, it was already difficult before. It's going to be even more difficult, I think, to find drivers, especially for the long haul distances. This is really not an attractive job like it might have been in the past. I think that we are entering a fourth quarter, and the supply chain employees, wherever they are, whatever they're working on, a transportation, on warehousing, on manufacturing, people are exhausted. Let's be very honest. They have gone through a lot of the COVID challenges, obviously, but also of the fact that the demand is there, and the economy has picked up and so on. We keep asking more, but with less actually. So I think it will take time before we start resuming a little bit of, and I cannot even say normality, because I think it will never go back to the same normality that we had before. But that being said, I agree with what you say, Bobby. I mean, we do expect still that it's going to improve, but definitely not in the next 2 quarters, I think. And especially this quarter, it's going to be really challenging. The holiday season, the storms, the snow, we're going to for sure have our fair share, as we always have. It's just that you don't have the capacity, you don't have the same agility. So that's why for us, as a shipper, and especially into the consumer goods industry, it's really thinking about the consumer first, and how can we get the product on the shelf as the right and the most important thing, right? Despite the challenges.
well said. Keeping it frank, with an optimistic spin. All right. I think you've got to be optimistic to be a supply chain practitioner, right? Based on some of the days.
Definitely.
So we got some great comments. Unfortunately, I'm not going to have time to get through all of those. I want to make sure, Bobby, we enjoy these quarterly conversations, and Patricia, as busy as you are, and the Mondelez team is thrilling your consumers around the world. Again, Oreos and milk. Just keep the Oreos and milk coming, and the world will stabilize things.
Be a better place. That's right.
That's right. I want to make sure, Bobby, let us know the easiest way beyond the link, freight.usbank.com. That's how folks can sign up for this quarterly information that never disappoints, huh?
Yep, it's a free link, or a free subscription, and you'll get it delivered in your email box quarterly.
Wonderful. And we've got that link also in the show notes of today's episode. So y'all check that out. And as a follow-up, Bobby, how can folks, I'm sure you get keynote requests and interview requests all the time. How can folks connect with you?
I get some downwind of the freight.usbank.com link, which is the subscription link, but then also my information's on LinkedIn, and it's current, bobby.holland@usbank.com, and I'll be happy to answer whatever questions I can.
Wonderful. Appreciate that, Bobby. And Patricia, same question. When you're not solving the world's supply chain issues, you and your dynamic team there, how can folks connect with you?
Through my LinkedIn profile, obviously, I think is the easiest one.
I agree with you. I'll tell you, LinkedIn's making things very easy for us. Well, big thanks, Bobby Holland and Patricia Gabriel. Before they go, Greg, this is always a very informative, data-driven conversation. Not, as Bobby Holland said, not data scientist. How'd you put it, Bobby? Data science oriented.
Yeah.
I'm going to completely steal that phrase from you, Bobby. That is wonderful. Greg, these are really fun but important conversations we have. We love how we take kind of the voice of the data, so to speak, with Bobby Holland, and then pair that with a leader from industry that is, leading and doing it out there. Your final word, Greg, before we bid our guests adieu.
Well, all of this has made me think of a grocery store visit I made, excuse me, just some weeks back, and the good work that Patricia and her team at Mondelez were doing. I think we even had the photograph that I took on one of the shows of the full shelves of Oreos of many varieties. So there are people persevering and succeeding even in this difficult environment, right? And I'm sure that it's taking backflips and all sorts of unnatural acts to try and figure out how to make this go. Clever acts, as Bobby coined the phrase, right? And I just want to applaud everyone who is doing that, because
I agree.
it is important, and it is about the consumer. And Patricia, great that you acknowledge that. My saying is the supply chain begins and ends with the consumer. It does. If not for them, we're not needed. So,
excellent point.
I just want to acknowledge the work that everyone's doing to get there, and also to encourage consumers to be patient. This is not going to be the holiday of your youth or even your recent past. Goods are going to be hard to come by. Many of them won't land. Many of them intended for Christmas won't land until after Christmas. A lot of those ships that are in port now, those are ships that are delivering goods for the spring fashion season, right? So if the goods aren't here, they may not be here for Christmas. And I would just encourage everyone to make an alternate plan besides consumption. Right?
Embrace PTK every day, Greg. Patience, tolerance, and kindness. We're going to need loads of that. Hopefully loads not stuck in cargoes to get through the end of year season, right?
No doubt.
No doubt. All right. So on that note, big thanks again to Bobby Holland, Director Freight Data Solutions at U.S. Bank. Always a pleasure, Bobby. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
You bet. Have best of luck this weekend too, Bobby, by the way. Let us know. We need some pictures, right? And joining Bobby today was the one and only Patricia Gabriel, Vice President, U.S. Customer Service and Logistics with one of our faves, Mondelez International. Patricia, always a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure for me.
Have a great weekend. Thank you, Bobby and Patricia. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Hey, Greg, you never know when that swoosh is coming. You never know. There's always something else. It's just one additional thing I want to bring into the conversation, but it always messes with our timing. But that, I'll tell you, with Bobby, just keeping it frank and transparent around there. Bobby and Patricia, gosh, we could sit down and solve many of the world's challenges, huh?
Yeah, no doubt. And here's evidence that Patricia is already solving. Let me see if I can get this to focus on. There we go. Patricia is already solving some of the world's challenges, because that is the shelf, the store shelf that I was alluding to earlier. So it can be done. And, it probably does take a lot of magic and witchcraft to make it happen these days, but it can be done. And again, also, I think it's a great opportunity for people to just kind of sit back and reevaluate. People have been reevaluating what's important to them for 19 months now. So it's probably a good time to reevaluate what's important to you about the holidays and how you'd like to spend them, because it may not even be possible to get what you or your loved ones want for the holidays. So excellent point.
Enjoy. Presents spelled differently, I think, this year, right? Big thanks to our production team. Appreciate all that y'all do. Really appreciate Bobby, Dan, and the whole U.S. Bank team for all the work they put into a very helpful piece of research each quarter. And big thanks, of course, whenever we get a chance to pair all of that with a senior leader from supply chain like Patricia Gabriel, which, man, it's like a passion. She loves what it came out in the prep meeting. It came out today. She loves what she does. And we need lots of enlightened and innovative leaders getting us through these times like her, right?
No doubt. Yeah. Doing great work. And I love the insights. I think, U.S. Bank wants to have these insights from the people who are doing the doing, right? From the people who are making these transactions and these shipments happen. So I think that's a great, an important point of view for us to expose there.
Agreed. Well, big thanks to you, Greg. Appreciate you joining me here today. Great to have you back in the saddle. I know things have been busy. It's a busy fourth quarter for all these days. Big thanks to all of our listeners that tuned in here today. Sorry we couldn't get to everybody's questions and comments. Lots of data and perspective to get through, as always, each quarter with our friends with U.S. Bank. Hey, folks, have a wonderful weekend. Hopefully the weather is as nice where you live as it is here in Metro Atlanta. I think those leaves have been blowed around just as much as they could possibly be blowed around earlier today. I'm glad I didn't lose a connection, but always a pleasure. Hey, most importantly, folks, most importantly, do good, give forward, and be the change that's needed. And with that being said, we'll see you next time right back here at Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.